Our software provides a lot of functionality. It goes from application intake, digitizing forms, through case management workflows and workflow orchestration tools. And we also do direct cash payments. So we facilitate the actual cash transfers from a government account to individuals. And then what I'll talk about mostly here is what we offer in the way of reporting. So reporting is a hugely important motion for most government agencies. I'll talk a bit more about exactly what that entails. I'm going to start, and I'm going to spend a lot of time with why we ended up with the solution we ended up with. A large part of it's motivated by the specific needs driven by the space, by who our customers are, and by what we're trying to accomplish. So those played a really big role, and like I said, I'll spend at least 10 minutes just on that part. And then I'll go over a little bit of how the solution works. It's Python scripts that do a little bit of behind-the-scenes work so that an analyst just has to run a function to administer a lot of dashboards at once. Very fun, in my opinion. And then I'll actually show you in action an example of setting up 3 dashboards with slightly different requirements each. And the whole process, including adding some custom content afterwards, takes like 3 minutes. Pretty fun. And I encourage you, while you're thinking through or kind of looking at this content, imagining what it would be like to do some of the things that we're trying to accomplish in a tool like Tableau. In particular, I'll draw that comparison a couple of times because I think it's an important one. Really shooting for something that's highly customizable, like Tableau, but something that we could administer 80 times in an afternoon, which is a little bit different. So this is the team. I mentioned not the lead programmer, but project lead. Lisa over there did the majority of the programming, and you'll see some of her work later on. And I'll also point out while I'm here that the stack that we use to get to what I'm going to show you is really, really simple. It's built on tools that like any data person knows, most analysts as well. It's just a few Google Cloud services, it's not super complicated, that get data into BigQuery. We build some Python scripts, and what I'll be talking about leverages Hashboard, and that's it. So I mentioned what we did. Let's talk about how we motivated the solution we actually got to. So what does it mean for a government agency or some nonprofit in this space to do reporting? It can mean a lot of different use cases, and we have to solve for all of them at once. So this is really important to understand. A large part of it is financial accounting, especially when there's federal money involved. There's a large burden on the agencies for spending that money to very accurately account for it. And there aren't really that many good tools in their toolkit for doing that often. Sometimes agencies are better than others, but especially for smaller localities, smaller states, they just don't have a lot of good tools. And it can take a long time to upgrade. So that's something we really wanted to support. Impact reporting refers to being able to describe what your program did for the community. So that is really focused on understanding via things like surveys, via demographics collected through intake processes, who you've served and how well it went. They also use reporting for organizing and coordinating work. And that's actually quite a bit. So oftentimes these agencies are understaffed and they have to be pretty strategic with how they use their time. So being able to pull some reports that show how fast they're going, which parts of the process are sticking points, they need to be able to access that data. And they also use it for planning and evaluating new programs that they're running. And then finally, and I'll talk about this a little bit, they use reporting to communicate progress and performance as they go. So looking at this from a product lens, the first thing we did was do some customer interviews. What are people actually saying? What are the pain points? What are we trying to solve for? There are 2 kind of basic motions, and I already touched on this. There's ad hoc reporting that the program administrator doesn't know when it's going to come. They don't know what it's going to entail, but they're going to be expected to turn it around really quickly. And that can be often very stressful. And keep in mind, like this is a government employee. They weren't hired for their analytics skill set, right? This is a program administrator. They're rooted in service delivery. They're rooted in the support systems. This is something that they have to do. A lot of them have to do it, but it's not necessarily in their core skill set, and they don't necessarily get budget or specific tools for doing it. And then they have regular reports, things like impact reports that they produce on a yearly basis. They might have monthly reports, depending on the agency and how the state determines what reporting looks like. The requirements are really varied. And they have to do these things in a world where all of their tools are sort of fragmented. They might have a legacy system for data storage, and they might have something that they purchased more recently to do their BI or to do different parts. But the result of that is generally there's no source of truth across departments. Very hard to share information. And I heard testimonies when we were doing these interviews of people lamenting that you have all this data. The government collects a bunch of data. You have all this intake data too. You have really detailed information about the people you're trying to serve, and you have to set aside $25,000 to buy a specific tool just to analyze it. It doesn't really make sense for agencies. It's a really hard trade-off to make. So they want it to be integrated into their products as well, other things that they're using. And this is one note that came up over and over again in research. A lot of this work to develop these reports is done by exchanging Excel files over emails, and there's usually one person involved in coordinating who contributes to those Excel files. What does that mean? Keeping track of versioning is hell for a lot of them, thus the stress. So this is the environment that we're kind of building in, and it's important. I already mentioned this, but it's important to understand a lot of different people are going to be interacting with our solution here, with different skill sets, different objectives for what they're using the data for. They have different amounts of time to do it, and our team needs to be able to provide one solution that fits all of their needs, at least okay. And then, obviously, depending on who our customer is, their needs might be completely different. Federal agency, we don't work with any at the moment, but those requirements are extremely stringent. Every state does something a little bit differently. Localities have to usually report up to states. States often have to report up to federal agencies. So there's kind of this chain of requirements that stack in not a great way. And then a lot of programs are unique. These things are run by an agency. They're given guidelines for a large chunk of it, and then they get to determine how to do the rest, and that means we have to be able to manage both of those. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So we often talk about program categories. So rental assistance programs are one category of program. They operate pretty differently from other kinds, like a guaranteed income program, and their needs are pretty different. Within something like a rental assistance program, and actually I should have done this, who's familiar with what that means? When I say that term, a couple people are familiar with like the COVID era emergency rental assistance programs. You're at risk of eviction, you can apply to this program, and they give you, they pay back arrears. So whatever you owe in rent, they'll pay for you. They might pay your rent prospectively a little bit. That's what that kind of a program is. Guaranteed income program is a little more straightforward from the name. But so within a program category, I think about this kind of like a Pareto distribution. Around 80% of the content's generalizable. Most programs are going to want the same things. A lot of them are probably going to want detailed financial reporting, statistics on their service delivery, and demographics so that they can do their impact reporting. But one program might have more time or more staff or a harder backlog to work with. So they might want detailed workflow analysis. But some programs are understaffed or they don't really want cluttered reporting, so we don't want to give it to everybody. And some might be running surveys, some might not be. So if we offered some sort of like module in our reports to understand surveys, that really wouldn't apply to most people. And when we look at cross-program categories, because we don't just work with one kind of program, we see the inverse of that distribution. Around 20% of the content we can expect to see is generalizable across different programs. You might compare something like a rental assistance program to a workforce development program where a professional is applying to receive maybe a credit for a course they took, or something like that. And use the process to get from A to B, apply, process, give out money is pretty similar. But in terms of how to describe the programs and what the programs care about to determine how to do the next program better, it's a little bit different. So that adds a lot of complexity to what we're trying to do. Apologies for all the yellow. And working in government presents us with a few additional challenges. I'm not going to touch on these too much, but it's important to keep them in mind. Every solution we produce, every product feature we put in to our overall product has to at least touch on a few of these. So security, privacy, and observability, obviously very important. The government wants to protect its constituents. It's also collecting a lot of really detailed information about people. It's very important to protect that. And they want to know when you made a change, what was that change? Because if they get audited, which happens very frequently, and they need to produce a trail of how did we get to these numbers, we need to be able to provide them with some support for that. Security, there's a lot of fraud in government, especially in cash assistance. It seems like free money to some bad actors. And then there are what I think are pretty interesting sector-wide initiatives focused on making parts of government processes such as forms or workflows or eligibility criteria for different programs a lot more standardized by converting them to code and sharing them. So we also kind of want to fit into this standardization practice. And another feature of this is because of the way the funding sources work, a federal grant might be cut up for different states, Those states might be coordinated, they might not be. One state might give chunks of that money to different localities. They might be coordinated, they might not be. Because of that structure, we have to also administer this in a multi-tenant way often. We might have one customer who has 80 clients, and those dashboards are all a little bit different. They might be somewhat similar, but we want to be able to customize them all a little bit. So this presents us with a variety of challenges we have to balance. I don't know why I'm pointing this at the thing, like that's how it works. So we have a scale problem. We are a year into this project. We have 200 plus dashboards in production, around 400 users, and we have 2/3 of an analyst's time to do that. All of our customers are a little bit different, so there's a personalization problem. We have to put a little bit of custom content into each of those 200 dashboards. But we also want to generalize because we don't have a ton of time, and we know that a lot of the content we're developing for reporting is generalizable in certain contexts, and we want to be able to capture that momentum that we're building, that expertise we're building, and what we're learning from our customers as well. And then we obviously also have a breadth problem. I mentioned 2 program categories. We realistically could operate in 10 on that order. So it's a lot of varied content to keep track of. It's a lot of different needs to have to meet. And looking at the space of analytics tools, a lot of them fall into one of 2 categories. It's a tool that's either scalable, but not super customizable. We were actually using Domo prior to switching to Hashboard, which I'll talk about in a second. And that falls into that bucket, in my opinion. It has a way to create a federated data source where you can programmatically filter it for each customer, pretty secure. That's nice. Has a lot of other nice features for embedded analytics, but you really can't customize it. If you want to give something slightly different to someone, you have to make an entirely new instance. Or they're customizable but not laborious, but they're laborious to scale. Tableau really fits into this, in my opinion. I love Tableau. I used it for years. And the visualizations that I built out in it were super satisfying, but imagine having to do 80 in an afternoon. That would be terrible. So, faced with this challenge, we started looking at other options, and we happened to be working with Hashboard already a little bit, so we started to lean into this concept of dashboards as code. And I'm really, really fond of this idea. How many people have used this or are familiar with it? Okay, not too many, okay. So at a really basic level, dashboards as code is, you could think about it as a framework. Define some sort of data asset, some sort of dashboard asset using code. You can define it in JSON or YAML. Most solutions, I think, use one of those 2. Some of them use their own flavor. And there are a variety of products for this. Isn't an exhaustive list, and I couldn't be sure that every single one of these actually meets that category term. We use 2 of these, Grafana and Hashboard, and I'll focus on Hashboard. We're thinking how to leverage Grafana in a more scaled way, and we'll probably apply some of these same principles. I'll also point out, not all of these are the same. Doing a little bit of research, I really only have familiarity with these 2. But they all seem to have different specializations, different levels of integration and capabilities, different prices, different feature sets. Some are more cloud agnostic than others. Looking at you. So this framework I find really fun to work with because it lets me code, which when I have my analyst hat on makes me feel good. So let's talk about how this actually works for us. We're not seeing it in action yet. That's a misnomer. So this is kind of an overview of what the Python scripts are going to do in the background when you do see the demo. So it's relatively simple, and you can probably imagine how you would accomplish this in Python. It's not groundbreaking this part, but I think the application is very fun. So we have some sort of config that defines what's going to go in the dashboard. This will say we want these pieces of content, and these pieces of content are not standard. And that will call some boilerplate modules. We've kind of created these little chunks of dashboard that we think meet a specific need. This one describes payments in great detail. This one describes surveys in great detail. And we can source those in using the Python scripts defined by the configs that populates a series of views. They're called in Hashboard and data models that are defined as YAML files. If there's custom content, we can flag that, either build a data model from the SQL, create custom views, put them in a separate place, and then read those in and compose those all into the production assets. And we can do this either at the onset, this customization piece, or we can do it way later without actually impacting any of the boilerplate content. Which means, and this is very fun also, we can decouple the dashboard development process from production very easily. So when I show this demo, here's just a little bit of information about how it's going to work. So this is a multi-tenant example. It's a parent with 2 children, we call them. So maybe it's a state who is funding 2 different programs, and the 2 programs have pretty similar needs for now, so we're going to just give them some boilerplate content, and we can address their specific needs earlier. But the parent already told us they need a little bit extra for financial forecasting. So we know that. And we've, on the side, prepared another view for them to address that. And I'll also point out that the demo you're going to see is a bit of a pared-down experience because I was doing it. When the analysts do it, they have a lot more fancy tools, and it's connected to a database. It's very nice. And this is like a local, smaller version. But we are going to see the reports getting set up from scratch, from empty projects, sourcing all of that code in with just a config. And we're going to see a customization and how that fits in. So I think I need to come over here. And here we go. Okay. So you can see we're in an empty project. So this is what Hashboard looks like. If you haven't seen it. This is the home view, welcome page. I'll click around just to show that it's empty. No dashboards here, no data models. This is the parent project. It's just called Data Council Demo. There's an A and B child. Go into some code, and I'm just going to run one function. Oops. And there are 3 projects in the config. It's going to automatically source these dashboard modules from the boilerplate content. And then in this example, it deploys directly to Hashboard. Normally, we have a QA step. You can see that it created some file structure for each of these. It took these, we call them dash blocks, that define different pieces of the dashboard, and it composed them into this dashboard. Also populated an environment file that helps us source in programmatic variables. You can follow that link, or you can just switch over here. So I'll refresh the page, and now there are magically assets. Here's our dashboard. This is around a quarter of the modules. And so this was the primary dashboard. The content in, I did a bad job of showing this, but the content in the 2 child dashboards is slightly different. They have a much more granular, yes, this piece, applications at a glance, is really focused on workflow. So not all parent orgs usually need those because they're not in the weeds. They're mostly focused on financials and impact. Cool. So I'll go back to this, and then what I'm going to do is add in the customization. So this is pre-prepared. It's a little YAML chunk. Confused for a second. There we go. So I've already prepared it, and there's a saved view that it references. I'm going to throw those in a separate folder where the config lives. And I'm also going to do another thing here. So this is the standard dash block. I'm just editing it. So this is a modified version of it. I'm not going to have to change that in the config. But I am going to add that applications section in because why not? So save that file and then run the same function again. Normally you can do one at a time. But again, this is a pared down version. See, it flagged these customized assets, and it's going to source them into the dashboard. And when this deploys, I'll switch over, and the content will have updated. I don't know about you. I really hate just leaving those open. There we go. So this new section that we added in from the config, and this is the new view that we defined. And this is all fake data. These are not real people or real payments. And you can see that this is unchanged. This is one of the children projects. So there you go. In, I think this was under 4 minutes, I set up 3 dashboards, and I customized one. It took 5 minutes to make the view, so in total, this whole process took 10 minutes. And because we often are in a situation where we're doing 80 at once, that time savings relative to copying dashboard file, Tableau files and editing them each, real time saver. Oh, there it is. So this has I'm so sorry for this slide. It has a variety of benefits for us. It is scalable. It's a lot faster to administer a lot of different dashboards. It is customizable and pretty easily at scale. We really don't have to think too hard about it. And in fact, it works a lot faster than we had planned for it to, so it bought us a lot of time to do more interesting work, which was the goal. It's pretty secure. As far as third party goes, the one we chose is good. But the thing about this that we like is we control end-to-end everything that gets into the dashboard in code. And if it gets changed in production, which theoretically they can do, it's a self-serve tool, we can overwrite that to make sure that the content's always correct. Not necessarily security, correctness. It's flexibly programmatic, so we can actually change what is programmatic about it on the fly by editing the code. That's really nice. It's self-service. Hashboards, that's a feature of Hashboard, and we really like that feature. The nice thing about this and how it interacts with the secure component of this is the way we've set up BigQuery and generally our data stack, we can offer self-service analytics even up to querying their own data or additional data sources that we made for them to create more custom views and still maintain pretty strong boundaries around customer data, which is really important for us. It's also a collaborative tool. I mentioned that workflow of sharing different pieces of an Excel file and coordinating, collecting all that information. This way, you can have all your data compiled in one place. We can facilitate people putting data into BigQuery very easily. That's just GCP tools. And then they can share links of views they've created, new data cuts that they've made, entire dashboards if they want to. And this is actually a really nice feature for our customer success team because they can also create content for our customers in a really customized way and then work with us to turn it into code and to formalize it. We love that pattern. It's great to work with them that way. It's so enabling. It's also iterable by nature. The fact that we can make some changes to what the boilerplate content looks like in code and then roll that out to all of our customers at once in, again, less than an afternoon means that we actually have the ability to improve our content over time without having to worry about when are we going to release this. And then it's really fast and easy. Setting up the scripts to do this took the lead programmer analyst a couple months while they were onboarding. And then that got us to 80% of what you just saw. And like I said, the tools to get from A to B, almost every data person knows them. I think that's it.